Hello everybody, Ropo here from Instrument Vending bringing you a new video. Today I would like to discuss what many of you will likely find to be controversial. I'd like to share why I think the Switch has been a massive disappointment. My opinion is quite at odds with the average Nintendo fan. The Switch is constantly praised and is hailed across the Nintendo community as Nintendo's best ever system. They praise its hybrid nature and its so-called vast catalog of games. I think it can be unwise to make such a judgment of a system so early in its life, whether the judgment be positive or negative. However, we've now come past the Switch's third birthday, and if the Switch follows the norm for a traditional Nintendo console's lifespan, it's then likely that the Switch has more days behind it than ahead. So while it may have been brash to make such a stark statement about the Switch earlier on in its life, I think Nintendo has now had sufficient time to improve on its pitfalls and show us what their new hybrid was capable of. I think it is now reasonable to make a statement on what the Switch has been, as it would be very unexpected for it to change in any fundamental way in the future. One can only hope, but after seeing such a pattern, one can accept a lost cause. I believe the Switch to be a lost cause for a variety of reasons. First, the Switch was flawed from the start due to its hardware. The Switch simply couldn't keep up with its competitors, and its lack of advancement in processing power over Wii U resulted in there being very little games released on the Switch that looked that impressive compared to last gen. And rarely does a game on the Switch really look like it's next gen. The lack of processing power also resulted in a vast lack of support by third parties, leaving the overwhelming majority of AAA third-party games on other systems and off the Switch. Many brushed these concerns aside in the early days of the Switch, assuring fellow fans that once the Switch's sales took off, the difference in power between the Switch and other systems would cease to matter, because third parties would just make their games work on Switch to profit off of its success. Alas, 3 years and over 50 million Switch consoles sold later, and third parties have still not jumped on board. This problem of power extends to first-party games as well. Nintendo systems usually had a big jump between each other in terms of power, excluding the Wii, which was not much of a big jump from the GameCube. So even the Wii U had that cool feeling most Nintendo systems have had. For example, Mario Kart 8 felt next-gen compared to Mario Kart on the Wii. One of the exciting parts about every new Nintendo console should be seeing next-gen looking versions of your favorite series be revealed, then playing those games. On Switch, this is largely absent. It's a bad sign that the best-selling Switch game is a port from the last system. Secondly, I believe the Switch to be a massive failure for something that continues to be Nintendo's fault. This is something that could actually change. It isn't the Switch's hardware, and it isn't any decisions that can't be revoked. It's pattern of behavior by Nintendo that I find to be the Switch's greatest flaw. Nintendo's consistent laziness and complacency. Nintendo showed promise with the Switch in 2017. Nintendo launched it with a system seller and had new games almost monthly through its first calendar year. In theory, the Switch could have foregone the constant and long droughts suffered by the Wii U and other previous Nintendo consoles by having both home console and handheld teams work on games for the one system instead of splitting efforts across two systems. Sadly, this hope was short-lived. It was odd when 2018 came around and there were almost no games announced for the first half of the year. Perhaps Nintendo was keeping these games close to the chest and waiting to surprise fans. Well, it turns out that so few first-party games were announced for the first half of 2018 because there were in fact very few first-party games releasing in the first half of 2018, and the second half was not much better. Then some fans thought that perhaps 2018 was just a breather year after 2017, but once again, as 2018 came to a close and 2019 came, a similar lack of announcements followed. Happily, the second half of 2019 was pretty good, and definitely a market improvement over 2018, but still a far cry from 2017. And as we are now 4 months into 2020, we are going through the same drought. So since we have followed this pattern for 3 consecutive years, I think it is fair to consider this as the norm for the Switch as opposed to what we got in 2017. Why Nintendo's first-party output is so limited compared to what would be thought possible is beyond me, and that's nothing to say as to the quality of many of their first-party offerings. The Switch's hybrid concept bears its strengths, but sadly it also has its fair share of cons. Many of the Switch's handheld games feel partly like experiences suitable to a handheld, like the 3DS. Where we would think to get a next-gen-like experience on our new Nintendo home console, we instead get what feels like a handheld game. I think it's possible many former 3DS developers felt comfortable developing for Switch this way, as it is first more cost-effective and efficient from a game development perspective, and because it would be more acceptable since the Switch can be seen as a portable Nintendo console like the ones they worked on before. Thankfully, this is not true of all Switch games, especially those developed by former home console developers, like those who made Super Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild. When you are bringing a Nintendo series to the next home console, you should adapt and truly bring the game series to a home console experience and not feel comfortable staying at a 3DS-like level. Nintendo's laziness and incompetence are not limited to their first-party games, though. It extends to nearly every aspect of the Switch. This includes system features and their online system. 3 years after launch, Netflix is nowhere to be seen. The Switch can't be used as a multimedia device like the other systems. This likely is the result of an attitude that the Switch does not need these features, but after 3 years of roaring success, it only makes sense for Nintendo to offer a more complete package. With modern home consoles usually change, improve, and add new features as they go on through software updates. Switch had a few features added early in its life, but the vast majority of updates are simple stability improvements. So much of the system's untapped potential, which was imagined by fans at launch, remains untapped. This is the same for their online service, which has been the most agreed on disappointment of the Switch, but instead of trying to improve it, Nintendo has moved on forward with it almost unchanged after 3 years, aside from giving fans some NES and SNES games to convince them to pay the $20 annual fee. When Nintendo announced they were charging for online on Switch, some were excited as it could have indicated that Nintendo was finally taking their online seriously. Instead, they are having us pay for previously free features. Finally, the system's quality itself is an unresolved issue from launch, and the Switch was tainted by a myriad of design flaws, which could result in damage to the system, or it not functioning properly. What became the most infamous of these is Joy-Con drift, which ruins the gaming experience on Twitch for some, and which remains a problem despite Nintendo easily being able to fix it. Instead, some have to go through the time-consuming process of sending their controllers in for repair, or just getting another pair of Joy-Cons. Under both of these scenarios, Joy-Con drift could return again. Nintendo lacks a permanent solution to a simple but very annoying problem. Their lacking is apparent, and what's worse is their complacency to stay lacking. The worst part is that after 3 years of fan support and incredible sales, Nintendo has stayed complacent in having bare-bones third-party support, lacking system features, a horrible online service, and easily damaged hardware. If Nintendo was slowly improving these aspects of their system, I would feel much more hope for the future and have a much more positive outlook on the Switch, but it is Nintendo's disregard of these problems and their complacency in continuing in like manner that leaves me without a reason to. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to bring you a new video soon. Goodbye.